Is it that we've always had these mental health issues in men, or they've just ignored it, or what's causing it? Like, what's got us here?
What's got us here is just total misunderstanding of what is and isn't appropriate when it comes to male mental health. We know that throughout history, men have always seemed to have taken their lives at higher rates than women do. And that is the case by reducing cholesterol, you lowered your risk of dying from heart attack. The reason why is because you increase your risk of dying from everything else so much that you don't live long enough to have a heart attack. Does that make sense?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Flow, the podcast. Today we are joined by the fabulous Ryan Parke, or should I say the men's coach. Ryan is a TEDx speaker specializing in how hormones, lifestyle, and goal setting impact male mental health. And in fact, has just shared something very interesting with me that we're going to jump straight in on, which I didn't know, around hormones and mental health. Ryan has created an evidence-based framework drawing on both his coaching experience as well as 900 sources, and coaches people in his 90-day program to be able to get into flow, right? You're getting men into their flow. And Ryan works with industry leaders, charities, NHS trusts, anybody who wants to learn how to provide effective support to men in the male mental health space, which I think is so powerful and so needed in this modern society. We hear more and more about men's mental health. And I was really excited. I was referred to Ryan by another podcast listener who said he'd be great for it, because I think this is such an important topic. And Ryan is very brave. He covers big topics. So we are going to be talking about the very sad, very devastating topic of male suicide. So we just want to put a bit of a trigger warning here at the beginning that we are going to be covering that topic because we think it's really important to shine light on that. But if that's something which might affect you, then, just consider that before we press ahead. So Ryan, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, Hannah. It's great to be on the podcast.
So let's get straight into it. We're going to come to a little bit about your story and what brought you into male mental health. But I would love to understand, first of all, when we're talking about that sentence there, goals, hormones, lifestyle, how have we got to this male mental health crisis? And how can we get out of it? What can we do about it?
That's a big question. I like how you started me off with something easy. How do we get here and what do we do about it? No,
well, let's just get straight in and get that stuff out the way. Not out the way, but you know what I mean? Then we can get kind of deeper into it. But I want us to jump straight in because we've got a lot to cover. And I know that otherwise me and you could be here all night. So
we've got an absolute ton to cover. And I love the question. So essentially, the short answer to that question, Hannah, is we have different endocrine systems in our body. That's a hormone system, depending on whether we are biologically male or biologically female. There's a lot more to what makes us who we are. There's matters like gender identity, gender expression. But one of the things that makes us who we are is whether we have this male or this female hormone system. They are both different. The same hormones and the same lifestyle factors affect people who are biologically male and biologically female completely different. Some of those we're going to highlight in this conversation today. And so the end result is, categorically, often what works for women doesn't work for men. And so encouraging men to do the things that work for women just because it works for women, that's actually not a very evidence-based approach.
So what does that mean? What's the impact of that? So I understand that that's what we shouldn't do, but why is that relevant?
The reason why that's relevant is the single biggest killers of men in the UK and Ireland are all preventable. Male mental health impacts everyone, regardless of your gender, because we all have someone who's male close to us that we wouldn't want to lose. And I mean, I just sometimes go back to statistics with this kind of thing, which is, according to the BACP, who are the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy, they've found that 79% of men agree it's more acceptable to talk about mental health than it was just 5 years ago, which is good news. Good news. 68% of men agree that there's less stigma associated with mental health than there was just 5 years ago. More good news. Between 2010 and 2022, the rate of men accessing talking therapy in the UK increased by 50%. So that's not a small increase. And that's not the number using talking therapy, it's the rate. So, that doesn't even take into account things like population growth. It means that men are now 50% more likely to attend talking therapy than they were back in 2010. On the face of it, it looks like everything's going in the right direction, except for this statistic, because in the same time, the most men agree it's more acceptable to talk. In the same time, most men agree there's less stigma associated with mental health. And in the same time that the men we know have become 50% more likely to attend talking therapy, they have also become 14% more likely to take their own life, according to the ONS. So something here is badly not working, and the ramifications of this is it affects everyone you know who cares about a man in their life.
And what's causing, is it that we've always had these mental health issues in men, and they've just ignored it, or what's causing it? Like, what's got us here from your point of view?
What's got us here is just a total misunderstanding of what is and isn't appropriate when it comes to male mental health. We know that throughout history, men have always seemed to have taken their lives at higher rates than women do. And that is the case across most of the world today. And there's an
Mhm.
argument that the countries that don't report it like that choose not to report it like that. So, yes, it's always been the case that people who are biologically male do take their own lives at higher rates. In fact, one of the things that's associated with risk of suicide in men is it's actually there's a period when you're inside your mother before you're born where you're exposed to your first dose of androgen hormones that are going to change the shape and development of your brain and make it more, biologists say, masculinized. And the
Wow.
more androgens you receive at that point, the more likely you are to die from suicide in your life. And the less you receive, the more likely you are to attempt suicide in your life. And as you might know, while men die from suicide at higher rates than women, women attempt suicide at higher rates than men. So the hormones we received before we were born seem to set the trajectory of the risk in our life. And yet, no one at the moment, to my knowledge, is really talking about hormones when it comes to preventing suicide in men.
That is so interesting. So when you're talking about androgens, so I know about androgens as I mentioned to you before we started. I was diagnosed with polycystic ovary syndrome when I was 15, and one of the symptoms I had of polycystic ovary syndrome was acne. And they say that acne is caused by high androgenic activity, which is basically you've got too many androgens, right, and too much testosterone. So I've been on a journey of literally for the last 15 years trying to lower my androgenic activity for my skin. I had no idea that had been that had come from my childhood and from my birth even. But also what you're saying here is that it's just the androgens in men. Explain that to me. So if I've got too many and they've got too little, is that what's bringing us out of society and out of balance in our society?
Um, I mean, that would be one way of looking at it. But what I said about the hormones before birth, it's quite nuanced. It's during the period where certain
Yeah.
developments are happening in your body before you're born. The higher the level of androgens that a person receives, the more likely they are to take their own lives. And actually, the way we know this is from the shape of your hands. So the shape of your
Wow.
hands show whether you received a high or a low dose of androgens before you were born. And analysis of people who've taken their own life or attempted their own life has shown that in men it's a trend that the more androgens you had before you were born, the higher your risk of taking your own life. However, once you're born, there is no relationship between high
Right.
testosterone and suicide if you're male. Now the theme is low testosterone and suicide if you're male. So hormones undoubtedly play a massive role in this conversation about male suicide. The first thing they do is set the stage for it.
Yeah.
And then once you're born, and we'll probably get into this, but once you are actually born, I believe testosterone is incredibly protective against male suicide. And some of these are just associations, and some of the reasons why are causal reasons.
Mm. So let's get into it now. Let's get into the testosterone now, because I think it's interesting that we're seeing a rise in testosterone in women and a decrease in testosterone in men,
Yep.
both leading to insulin resistance, polycystic ovary syndrome in women, and what you've shared with me just before we started that this is having a massive impact on physical and mental health. So can we talk about testosterone? Because I think we use this word and we throw it around. It's quite a known word, but what impact does it actually have on our bodies, and what happens if we've got too little or too much of it in a man?
Yeah, really, really nice question. So if you're biologically male, your testosterone is a really quick and easy way to establish your mental health, your physical health, and arguably your life expectancy as well. And so testosterone levels of below, I mean, I can get into nitty gritty if you like actual levels and things for anyone listening who's thinking, oh, I'd be really interested in that.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So I don't want it to be too numbers heavy, but when we know these things, it means we can make sense of previous results and stuff. So if you're biologically male, you're over the age of 21 and you have 2 functioning testicles, and your testosterone level is in the mornings is below 15.1 nanomoles per liter, that is a level that studies on older men have found is associated with risk of heart attack in men. I'll tell you why that's relevant in a minute. If your testosterone level is between 10.4 nanomoles per liter, that's associated with a 2.5 times increased risk, of prostate cancer. And 11.7 nanomoles per liter is the average level of testosterone in the bodies of men who've tragically taken their own life. And yet, I know healthcare providers who advise men every day that testosterone levels over 8.7 are optimal.
Wow.
So there's
That's mental.
There's this trap at the moment where men will listen to a podcast like this, think, oh, I should get my testosterone levels checked, and come away from that appointment being told something like, no, Ryan, you don't need to worry about your testosterone levels. Your testosterone levels are optimal. They're 9 nanomoles per liter, which is less than the average found in men who've taken their own lives. It's associated with risk of heart attack. It's associated with depression in men. And the reason being, which we were talking about before the podcast started, which is, so in men, low testosterone is an early warning sign of insulin resistance. And in fact, it is arguably the first sign of insulin resistance. Testosterone levels in men are the most amazing marker for insulin sensitivity and metabolic health. And yet not only do men not know this, even though it's easy to test and it's easy to improve testosterone levels, not only do men not know this, but there's actually stigma associated with testosterone levels that prevents men from finding this out. And I still hear things all the time like, oh, well, no wonder they ended up fighting. There was too much testosterone in the room.
Yeah. Wow. That is so crazy that there is such specific, clear science and evidence. So is that why you said at the beginning that a lot of the things that work for women when it comes to mental health really don't work for men? Because a lot of things for women are about like calming women, lowering female testosterone. So if men are then doing those things, they are lowering their testosterone, making their mental health even worse.
So
or is it not as straightforward as that? No.
Unfortunately, it's not as straightforward as that. But you've come onto one thing, which is really clever, which is, yeah, you're entirely right. You've hit the nail on the head, which is that what works for people who are biologically female just doesn't work for people who are biologically male. There's another hormone that's really involved in why our mental health outcomes are so different, which we can dive into right now, I think be really apparent.
Yeah.
So the other hormone that we should look at when it comes to mental health and why outcomes and signs and treatments are so different in people who are male versus female, the other hormone is oxytocin. So you might know oxytocin as the love hormone. And oxytocin is a hormone that is released when we touch those we care about, when we cuddle, when we hold hands, and when we talk about how we feel. There are other ways to release oxytocin, but let's keep this family friendly for now. So oxytocin is the bonding hormone, it's the cuddle hormone. And oxytocin significantly and quickly reduces stress in people who are biologically female and in other female animals. So this means lots of women, their lived experience might be, when I touch those I care about, when I cuddle, when I hold hands, and when I talk about how I feel better. My stress decreases. And so it can be logical and rational then, if that's your lived experience, that if your partner who you're worried about, if he was to talk about how he'd feel, then his stress would decrease. That's perfectly rational, isn't it, really? But oxytocin has been found to not lower stress in men, or so far as I'm aware, any other male animal. In fact, almost all the studies that say that oxytocin reduces stress, when you invest in the study and read the whole thing, their sample group was exclusively women, girls, or female animals.
Wow.
So oxytocin does not lower stress in male animals. I'm not saying it increases stress, but there are studies on men that show that when you do things that elicit oxytocin in a stressful situation, they become more stressed. And so lots of men, their lived experiences, when I touch those I care about, when I cuddle, when I hold hands, when I talk about how I feel, on its own, that doesn't reduce my stress. And so when they're constantly told every time they reach out for help, you just need to talk about how you feel, and that's not making them feel better, they come to a logical but dangerous conclusion, which is if talking alone is the solution, but it's not a solution for me, then there must be something wrong with me. And my message to those men is, no, it does not mean there's anything wrong with you. That's exactly what the science says.
Oh my God, Ryan, I'm feeling like emotional that thank goodness that you're like sharing this message, because I feel like I'm really well read and well researched and have studied a lot around this topic, and particularly actually around testosterone in men, mainly because a few of my exes have definitely been on the lower testosterone scale in the last few years, and I've tried to understand more about that. But this is like absolutely blowing my mind. Like, I imagine the listeners feel the same. I've never heard this explained at all. Like, how is this not bigger news? Because mental health is everywhere. Like, we're talking about mental health everywhere. How is this not bigger news that the thing that we're telling men to do and telling everyone to do, like including myself, like I'm always really pro therapy, is actually potentially doing harm? And also, so why isn't it bigger news? And then we need to, I don't know if I need to say this as a separate question, but I am getting like overexcited by the new information. But what should we be doing? What should men be doing? And what should we as women be encouraging our men to do that we love?
So, why isn't this bigger news? I want to start by outlining my sort of overall position, because what I say I provide talks on this, I provide training on this. I've worked with NHS Trust, as you know, from your wonderful intro that you gave me. So, why isn't this bigger news? Well, my overall position is that talking is vital for everyone, but for men, it's not the solution, because
Mm-hmm.
men don't get that oxytocin payoff, but it is the first step. It's the first
Okay.
vital step on the road to finding a solution. But next, men need to know what to talk about. So, for example, if I am depressed and have heart disease and am at risk of prostate cancer and type 2 diabetes because of my poor hormonal health, no amount of talking therapy will fix that unless my therapist knows enough about hormones to realize this risk and
Yeah.
coach me to address it. So I say talking is vital for everyone, but it's not the solution for men. It's just the first step. Men need to know what to talk about. And most importantly of all, men need to know what to do. And my coaching practice is all about giving men the tools they need to actually do things. You know, with or
Yeah.
without me, sometimes they just need the information. Sometimes people need the accountability to do it. So,
Yes. Much more behavioral. And that's where the lifestyle, the goal setting, all of
yeah,
these things are so important. Yeah. And I want to come on to that. So as a let's go on to that now actually. So what so we know that talking is the first step, and that's okay. So we're not like, I'm not like feeling too bad about the fact I have encouraged some men to do that. That was a good step.
yeah.
Let's talk about behavior changes. So, and I would love to cover, and I don't know if like if this is something that you do cover, but why as a society are we actually seeing this decreasing testosterone in men? I would really love to understand where that's coming from, and whether that's in our diet, in our ways of living, where that's coming from. We might come to, I'm kind of always constantly giving you two questions in one. Very bad interview
No,
style.
no, it's great.
Um,
It means that, this is resonating, right?
yeah, I think it's just like, it's my brain. I've got ADHD, right? So my brain's going 100 miles an hour right now, because I'm thinking like, this is changing my whole perspective on so many things. And
Yeah.
like, other guests of mine have been absolutely incredible, but I feel like I have already known about those topics. So it hasn't like shocked my mind. And I've looked at your stuff and I've been on your website, but I had no idea. I had no idea. So yeah, that's why I'm getting a bit like into it. And I feel like our listeners will be the same. So yeah, let me leave you with those questions.
Cool. So why is testosterone declining? And yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is testosterone is definitely declining in men, and some people are aware of that. There's one amazing study. So all the sources, all the references that I ever use or make reference to, they're all actually available on my website,
Yeah.
/science. And there's currently 1,100 sources on there now. So it was 900 when we booked this podcast, and now it's 1,100. So
Okay, well, we're going to load all that in the show notes, everyone. So don't panic. There's going to be links galore for you
yep.
to just consume Ryan.
So one of the studies that I want to mention, it was carried out in Finland, and what they did is they took archived blood and they compared the blood of men who were in their 60s in 1972 with men who were in their 60s in 2002. So these were age-matched men. And what they found is, I won't try and be too specific on the levels, but in 1972, European men in their 60s, their testosterone levels were over 21 nanomoles per litre. So that's away from the risk of heart disease, prostate cancer, depression, type 2 diabetes. By 2002, testosterone levels on average in men in their 60s in the same area had decreased to 13 nanomoles per litre.
Wow.
So that's a decline of about 37% in 30 years. And all the other studies look into it find the same thing. The decline in age-matched men is more than 1% per year. And at the moment, everyone's being relatively quiet on this. No one's really talking about it. But when men in their late teens are suffering from infertility and rates of infertility are increasing in men, then this will be the single biggest risk to our existence, and no one's talking about it. In the meantime, we're dealing with the increased rate of suicide and we're dealing with all these other issues, but no one's really looking at why. So what's happened in that time? There's many, many factors in that time that could have an effect. And I've met people and they will talk about things like plastics, and they'll talk about the changing roles in society and things. But if you ask me, the single biggest factor, which I've found from experimenting in my body and from working with my clients, the single biggest factor is what we eat. So in the late 70s and in the early 80s, late 70s in America, early 80s in Europe, the Western world decided that fat was bad based on very poor quality evidence, really based on a hunch, and decided to gamble all their chips on it. And as a result, since then, the rate of sugar and carbohydrates that we eat is increasing all the time. And the way that it works is testosterone is made out of natural fats, specifically saturated fat.
Which comes from?
You'll get that from like butter. That's any fat that's solid at room temperature that's natural. So you get that from butter, you get that from ghee, you get that from coconut oil. It's the fat in
Olive oil,
meat.
Avocado, nuts, peanut butter.
They're actually different kinds of fats, but they are
they?
often
Okay.
good. Yeah. So saturated fat, the way that most people know that is like the butter, it's the dairy products that we're told we should avoid to reduce our cholesterol. In theory, good idea. In the 1970s, it was thought of a good idea, but testosterone is made from cholesterol. Serotonin is made from cholesterol. And so when you reduce cholesterol, you end up with massive problems. It's now thought that the reason why studies in the 70s found that by reducing cholesterol, you lowered your risk of dying from heart attack. The reason why is because you increase your risk of dying from everything else so much that you don't live long enough to have a heart attack. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
If you look at all-cause mortality...
That's so dark.
Yeah. If you look at all-cause mortality,
Horrible.
which is your chance of being alive in 12 months, the lower your cholesterol generally, the worse your chances are of being alive in 12 months. So the problem we have is we've managed to accidentally demonize the fats that our body needs, the cholesterol that our body needs, and instead we're getting our energy from sugar and carbohydrates. In order to access that energy, our body requires insulin. When there's too much insulin, your body is very clever. It starts to resist insulin, and now you have low testosterone or PCOS.
That is so wild. It's so wild. It's amazing, actually. Food. My personal development journey started 10 years ago, and it started with food. I feel like quite a lot of people's journeys start with food. Like, I want to change the way I look, so I'm going to look at food, right? When you're younger. I'm not saying everyone, I'm just saying like generally. And I've been here, there. I've had 3.5 years of therapy. I've set this goal. I've done, I'm a coach, blah, 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 blah. And at the moment, my thing that I'm really particularly focused on is food. That's kind of the place that I'm at 10 years later, is really understanding the food that makes me my best, makes me the most sexy, fertile version of myself, because I'm not in a relationship at the moment. And but I want to have kids. So when I meet my guy, I want to be like so fertile I can drop them straight away, right? So
Yep,
I'm just like
yep.
working on my fertility. So I'm really into food. And I just cannot physically believe the difference. Like, I already ate well. I've just been really like looking at like understanding more about gut health and making certain tweaks and actually trying to understand where the calories that I have in a day and where they actually come from. I cannot believe like how much more productive I am, how much happier I am just in the last few weeks. And I already ate well. Like, I would already say that I was pretty top. I would say I was like already pretty advanced, and then I've gone to like super advanced, like pro player levels of like dietary. And like the last like couple of weeks, everyone I've seen has been like, you look amazing. And then I've made more money in my business, but I feel like I've worked less hard. And the only thing I've changed has literally been the fact that I've like really focused in on my food. Like, but it's hard to make the change at the beginning. So if you're at that point where you're eating badly and your habits are really all over the place, it's hard, isn't it, to make that change? I'm sure you see that with your men when they come to you. How do you handle that? Like, let's thinking about the actual lifestyle changes that we need to make. Like, where do you even start in your 90-day program, for example? Where would we start?
That's a really lovely question. Well, I'll tell you how we handle it in my 90-day program. And then I'll also say what I think is the single most important thing. So even if you never work with me as a coach, you might not need to. So in terms of inside my 90-day program, one of the modules that we do together is we have this module called Hack Your Health. And it's a
Mm-hmm.
2-hour workshop on everything men need to know about nutrition and how it impacts their hormones. In the last 12 weeks, I know 2 men who attended that training, and within 4 weeks had reversed type 2 diabetes.
Shit.
Not 4 months. That would be doing it through exercise would probably take like 6 months. No, 4 weeks. One guy in not my recent cohort, the one before, 6 days after getting this nutritional training. Actually, I never normally call it nutritional training because I'm not a nutritionist, but it's this guidance on what to eat. 6 days after attending Hack Your Health, he was able to safely stop taking his blood pressure medications, which he'd been taking for 12 years. So the biggest thing is, and you've like correctly alluded to this, Hannah, but the single biggest thing is actually understanding how the different foods actually impact our body and our hormones. If you're told what to eat by someone else, but you don't understand why, you'll end up eating the wrong thing. For example, someone might say, "Oh, I'm going to or I'm not going to eat cheese." Cool. There's 200 different kinds of cheese in the world. They all have different structures, ingredients. So cheese is kind of a useless concept, really, when it comes to what to eat. So how do we do it? Well, I also, in my recent cohort, one of the guys, 2 weeks after attending Hack Your Health, had doubled his testosterone levels. 2 weeks.
Wow.
In my body, from following the protocols that I talk about in Hack Your Health, I took my testosterone levels, my morning levels, from 20.4 nanomoles per litre, so just into the optimal range. 8 weeks later, it was 23.3. And 8 months later, it was 29.7. So that's nearly a 50% increase. And I deliberately didn't change my diet. I didn't change my exercise. I didn't change anything except for food. I tried to control it as much as I could.
That's really cool. I love that. I do those kind of like controlled experiments on myself as well. I'm literally like a lab rat.
Yeah. You're your own lab rat. You'll sign any disclaimer. You'll do anything.
Yeah, I'm literally like, right, take the pictures, write everything down. Like, we're testing this. We're going to find this out. So, and what did you see? Like, so, okay, so the testosterone levels have gone up. So we're
Yep.
winning the test. We're testing well. But what does that mean in your life? Like, what changes did you see in your life?
Yeah, so I had some really interesting changes. So the first, and then I will answer your question outside of my coaching program. Where do you start, right? So,
Yeah.
The first thing I want to say is because people might say, well, Ryan, that's all well and good, but if you achieve that by getting your body out of balance, life, and especially mental health, is about balance, right? If you achieve that by getting yourself out of balance, that might not be a good thing. But I have reason to believe that every marker in my blood that I could get my hands on significantly improved in the same period. Whether that's
Mm,
my blood sugar levels, my HbA1c, which dramatically decreased and then stayed low throughout that 8 months, whether it's the best measure of your heart health is not your cholesterol, it's this thing called your triglyceride to HDLC ratio. I'm bringing out a video on that on my YouTube channel in the next couple of weeks.
great.
That
We need a link.
yeah,
Link it, link it.
that's the best measurement for your heart health, modern science says. So everything moved in the right direction. I
How
was
did you
really
feel?
happy.
You felt good.
Amazing, Hannah. I felt so good.
Yeah.
So at the beginning of this little experiment, uh, as an example of how it impacted my business, I used to never ever deliver speeches in the afternoon because I wouldn't have the energy to do it if I did a speech in the
Right.
morning. Now, I can't believe I ever worried about delivering speeches in the afternoon. Sometimes when I'm booked, people say, we can't put it in the afternoon because everyone will be tired after lunch. And I think, and it reminds me, I used to be tired after lunch.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine that. Also, I used to be covered in eczema, which I
Mm,
addressed just through. First, I had some guidance from an Ayurvedic practitioner, but then when I changed my diet to incorporate more healthy fats and less carbohydrates, the eczema just totally stayed away. I can bring the eczema back in my body by eating lots of sugar or lots of nightshade, which is tomatoes and potatoes. I can bring the eczema back, and then I can just make it go away by just not eating them.
that's so interesting. I haven't tried tomato removal for skin for acne. Should
Yeah.
I?
Well, I personalized advice. I don't really give it up. Give it until like we know more about the
Yes,
situation.
I
But
understand that. Yeah.
I'm a big follower of Ayurveda as well, which is like this ancient Indian form of
Yeah,
healing,
yeah.
and it just gives a complete guide on if you have this issue, this is what you should and shouldn't eat, and loads of it. Either no one's looked into it, or when they have looked into it, modern science has said, yeah, it's pretty accurate actually.
That's interesting because I eat a lot of tomatoes.
Yeah, I love tomatoes, and
Yeah.
I really love tomatoes, and it's a bit of a problem when I see them growing. I'm like, that will do me. I know my eczema will come back, but I can
That's
deal
so
with that.
interesting, isn't it? Oh my goodness. I mean, they're like a foundational part of my diet. I need to look into this. So, okay, so we've touched on little elements of this, but what's led you into this work? I mean, you're incredibly passionate, you're incredibly knowledgeable. That doesn't just come from, oh, I've studied this. That comes from I've lived this. So how did you get here?
So June 2019, I bumped into a lady who I had not seen in years, and I was really excited to hear the latest about her son because Jenny's son Brad was taller than me, more muscular. Some would say slightly better looking. I know that's hard to believe, but a strong argument could have been made.
I don't believe it.
Don't worry, me neither. But the important thing to know is Brad had a fast car, big house, and a great job. Plus, he was a dad with a loving wife. And I like to believe that at the time I was on the same trajectory as Brad, but I was just a couple of years behind because of the age difference. Then I saw the look on his mum's face and I thought, oh no, what have I said to upset her? And she said, Ryan, you're asking me how Brad is. You don't know. Brad's taken his own life. Now, I was really taken aback by that, Hannah. The reason being,
Oh.
firstly, was the loss of Brad. But then there was something else that also kind of bugged me in the back of my head, which was my whole life I'd always heard that the reason why men die from suicide at higher rates than women is because men don't talk. And yet Brad was the most open and articulate man that I knew. In fact, I found out after he died that 2 years before his death, Brad reached out for help, went to see his doctor, was prescribed antidepressants, which he took, was referred to talking therapy, which he attended. And 2 months before his death, his mum, Jenny, who works in mental health, said, Brad, call me every day. Tell me how you feel. You've got to get these feelings off your chest. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting these things didn't help Brad. I'm sure they did. But what struck me at the time was here was a man who did all the things that we tell men in crisis to do, and he still wasn't here. I wondered what else could Brad have done. And Brad's mum, Jenny, said to me, Ryan, you should learn about this because every 5 hours, 4 people take their own lives in the UK and Ireland. 3 of them are going to be men. And I decided there and then, it was not related to what I was doing for a living, but I decided to set aside one day every week from June 2019 to the end of the year to learn everything that I could about male mental health. And on my very first day of research, I bumped into a study that stopped me in my tracks because it just happened to mention there's one day every year where heart attacks in men jump up by potentially more than 30%. And yet, on the same day of the year, heart attacks in women actually go down by potentially as much as 30%. Can you guess what day that is?
Christmas Day?
Actually, that's a really good guess. So on Christmas Day,
Valentine's Day?
maybe if a man forgets Valentine's Day, that could cause a
No.
heart attack.
What is the day? 1st of January. I don't know.
All good guesses. So Christmas Day is a brilliant guess because heart attacks do jump up in men on Christmas Day, but they also go up in women. So it's not the one we're looking for. Same as New Year's Day, 1st of Jan, heart attacks up in men, up in women. We're looking for up in men, down in women.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. So up in men, down in women. So women get less stressed from oxytocin. So is it to do with that? Is there the oxytocin link here at all, or no?
There's no oxytocin link, but you're
Oh,
along the
it's not
right
from
lines.
that link from earlier. Okay, I don't know then. I'm not very good at guessing games.
No, don't worry. So the day every year where heart attacks jump up in men and go down in women on the same day is the Monday after the clocks jump forward by 1 hour.
Jump forward. So that's in the winter.
That's actually in the spring.
Oh, that's the spring when they jump forward. Oh my God, I'm not
Yep.
doing well here at all.
No, don't worry.
Wow.
So,
So why is that?
so that's what I wanted to know. So this is my first day of research on the topic of men's mental health, male mental health, and I've just been totally derailed by this fact. I'm like, I've got to find out why. So I spent the rest of that 7 hours of research just pulling this together. No single study says this, but what I could see from by the end of that day is when the clocks jump forward, we should, in theory, go to bed an hour early. But have you ever actually done that? I never have.
No, I don't think so.
So when the clocks jump forward by an hour, which in the UK is going to be in March, in Australia, it's the opposite end of the year. When the clocks jump forward by 1 hour, it's like a mass experiment where everyone loses an hour's sleep at the same time. What happens in your body when you lose even 1 hour's sleep depends upon whether you're biologically male or female. In a male body, losing even 1 hour of sleep lowers testosterone for days. And that's when I learned that in a male body, as testosterone goes down, the chances of having a heart attack go up. And that made me feel that's really strange because my whole life until that point, I'd never heard anything positive about testosterone.
Mm,
I had heard negative things, but never anything positive. So I decided next week, I'm going to dedicate 8 hours of research into the hormone of testosterone and see what it does in men. And the following week came around. My first research question of the day was, why does testosterone make men aggressive? And I could see that that's complete BS. Testosterone does not make men aggressive. In fact, it's been disproven so many times that if you hear someone say that it does, then you know that they're listening to myths and not evidence, unfortunately. And then the next thing I wanted to know is, why does testosterone seem to protect a man's heart? And I found out later that day that not only does it seem to protect a man's heart, as we've spoken about so far, it also protects his mental health. So the biggest killer of men from the age of 18 to 50 in the UK and Ireland today is suicide.
yeah.
Suicide in men and depression in men are repeatedly linked to having a low level of testosterone. Now, of course, it's possible, entirely possible, to be depressed or to think about ending your life and not have a low level of testosterone, of course.
Yeah.
But we need to know they often occur at the same
Yeah.
time. The biggest killer of men in the UK and Ireland today over the age of 50 is heart disease. Heart disease, heart attack, heart failure, and high blood pressure in men are all preceded by and predicted by low testosterone. And
Whoa.
the biggest killer of men over the age of 50 after heart disease is cancer. The most likely cancer men will be diagnosed with is prostate cancer. And as we spoke about earlier with testosterone levels, the single biggest indicator that a man will develop prostate cancer is not actually high PSA levels, it's low testosterone. A couple of studies have found that and recommended that if we started testing men for low testosterone rather than just high PSA levels, we would accurately find prostate cancer sooner and we would find more prostate cancer. And so all the biggest killers of men I saw on my second day of trying to understand male mental health were all linked to, preceded by, and predicted by low levels of testosterone. And so this is the angle that I came at it from,
Mm,
which is nothing more than what does the evidence say? No one told me where to go. I just started devouring the
yeah.
evidence. And within 6 months, I was sharing it with guys in, one-to-one coaching calls. And when I saw the transformation that those men were having, I decided eventually someone has to someone has to make this a thing. Someone has to say this is important enough for me to risk my career on it. And eventually I decided, oh crap, I think it's me.
I almost think you should be called like the testosterone coach.
Yeah, so in
Just
these
from a
podcasts,
branding perspective, like, I don't
yeah,
know, maybe you do talk. I just feel it because the men's coach, I've seen, there are other men's coaches and I've seen that, but I've never seen someone, and I've looked at their Instagrams. Obviously, I work in personal branding, but I just feel like this is the testosterone coach, like, would almost stand out more because, and it's almost like a testosterone coach, like, is that a thing? And that would interest someone, like, do you know what I mean? I don't know, I may, that's just my branding head on, but I just, yeah, you blown my mind. And honestly, Ryan, like, that's not an easy thing to do.
this is why you do personal branding, because it's never even occurred to me to be the testosterone coach. So there we go. That's a
But
much,
doesn't it like
perhaps.
make so much sense in a way, because it's like, yeah, it's such a, like you said earlier, oh, there was too much testosterone in the room, oh, like, he can't get it up, he's got low testosterone, it's like a very colloquially understood, or what we think is colloquially understood hormone. Of all the hormones that exist, it's probably the one that we understand, it's the most well known in society, isn't it? Like, it's the most famous of all the hormones, it's the Kim Kardashian of hormones.
Yeah. It's the
And
most notorious for sure.
yeah, like, like dopamine's getting a bit more like of a rep now. Oxytocin, serotonin, like, they're coming up, but like testosterone is the one that I think is the most like colloquially talked about, but clearly the most understood. I mean, yeah, this has been wild. And like, we could honestly just keep going. And we'll probably, yeah, I feel like, guys, you've got to get on Ryan's, in Ryan's testosterone circle, right? Follow him, read his stuff, because we are just touching the iceberg here. And this is like, because I was thinking, like, I've always thought, oh, low testosterone, low, not very horny, unproductive, unmotivated, lazy. Like, that's how I've always seen like low testosterone. I didn't realize it was like, oh, low testosterone suicide, oh, low testosterone heart attacks. I've not seen it as such. It's so much more extreme than it's being talked about in our society. And something I want to touch on, we are coming to time, but I just want to touch on these changing roles in society, and then we'll wrap up with, like, what we can do and how can we get our testosterone tested, because I'm really interested in this concept of this male female dynamic. And I think we've got more women with high testosterone, more, roles are being more and more confused, right? Men with their highest testosterone levels are probably like the providers in the family. They're useful. They need, they need to take care of their wife. But when women are like, oh, I'm independent, and oh, I'm this, we could, it's not, no one's winning with it. So as a woman, like, as me, as somebody who, wants to be a woman in her feminine energy and wants a man in her masculine energy, but still wants to maintain her own career and ambition and passions, and not demasculate and not tell him to go, what should I do? What should we do as women?
It's a really lovely question, because this is the crux of why I believe it's important for us to understand these differences. Is it's not about putting people in a box. It's about using the tools we have to help people out of the boxes that they're in,
Mm.
if that makes sense. And by understanding female hormones, I can just be such a better husband, a better son, a better friend, a better ally, really. So I would say that if I was to summarize everything that I know from all the evidence and from every coaching session I've ever had, it would lead me to say that while positive female mental health is about feeling connected, positive male mental health is not. It is about feeling capable. And it's really clear when you look at the hormonal profiles of what is good for female mental health. One of the drivers for that is oxytocin, which you get from feeling connected. But for men, the hormones that are great for our mental health, two of probably the most relevant ones are testosterone and serotonin. And in people who are biologically male, that comes from feeling capable and from doing capable things. And
Wow.
so when it comes to, if you want to support someone who's biologically male, the best thing you can do is to just make it really clear that you believe that they are a capable person, a capable man, if you're happy using that language, able to, affect agency and some control in their life, able to control their own destiny. And that's all I really do as a coach. A big part of what I
Mm,
do is sharing knowledge. I call them tools that men can use. But having the tools doesn't actually make any difference if you don't use them. And it's about helping men to regain that sense of agency and control. And what society does at the moment is it says to men, it's actually your fault your mental health is poor because you're not talking in the way that women
yeah.
talk. And in order to assert that, you'd need to
So
have a
crazy.
causal relationship between men reaching out for help and it lowering their suicide rates. And that doesn't exist.
Mm. Wow, Ryan. I mean, it's just incredible. And I honestly was welling up when you were talking there because you need to be on a really global. I know you're already doing amazingly well, but like we've got to get you onto the global stages of these conversations. Like, I don't know, I need to think about this, how to do this because like this, I just thank you so much like for the work that you've done and the commitment that you've had on this topic and the way that you have learned how to articulate it and to share this message because you've completely blown my mind and we're so lucky that you're doing this, so and I'm sure all of the listeners are feeling the same. um I guess I guess the first place to start is get your testosterone levels tested. Is that you go to the doctor for that? Would you recommend that men do that?
You can, but you might not have a doctor who understands why or can interpret your results.
Can
And
we
I
do
hope
it
you do.
privately?
Yeah, so what I personally do is every 3 months, I just do a finger prick test at home. I pay £29 for that. The provider I use is Randox Health. I have no affiliation with them. They don't know who I am. It's just the one that I personally use. Um, After that, speak to someone who understands hormones to help you interpret it. And
Yeah.
if you either join my program or see Hack Your Health is on, because it's often delivered by mental health and suicide prevention charities, come along to that training and you'll learn what your results mean and in very specific practical terms how to increase your testosterone levels, because you absolutely can. Testosterone is a lifestyle hormone, and the reason why it's so tragic this information isn't available is because testosterone is extremely easy to measure, extremely easy to influence, and men are extremely motivated to do it because men like to have a healthy level of testosterone.
Wow. Wow, I mean, thank you, incredible. We will have all the links to Hack Your Health. Did you call it Randox Health? We'll put the link there, all the links to everything that Ryan has shared. And Ryan, thank you so much, and thank you, for everything and for being a guest with us.
Thank you for having me on, Hannah.